lovelies, how's it going? This is going to be a more in-depth review of Candle in the Darkness by Lynn Austin. On my thoughts and feelings of this book in general, there's some quotes I want to show, especially what I think they're all about, like the faith, except for one. One is how I love how Caroline feels about the war, and then everything else is just like faith content that I felt was amazing. But first and foremost, what is Candle in the Darkness about? Candle in the Darkness, I forgot her name, Caroline. Caroline Fletcher is a daughter of it says a southern plantationer, raised on a southern plantation, but that's kind of a lie because she's raised in Richmond. Her father's family owns a plantation, and I think she's out there for maybe like a summer. And you get when she's out there for a summer, but she's not raised on a plantation. In fact, she's raised inside the city of Richmond. Her father's dad, so her grandpa, and her uncle William run the plantation, but what her dad does is more like a merchant. He has warehouses. He sells not only stuff off of the family plantation, but other stuff as well. So she comes from a well-to-do family. I wouldn't say it's a very wealthy family, but a very well-to-do family. And prologue opens up. It's 1864, and so the prologue and part 2 are told in third person. In the prologue, you get Caroline in 1864. She's peeling off wallpaper because paper is so scarce right now in the South that she's peeling off wallpaper, and she's writing down her story, which then comes in part 1, which you get in first person because it's Caroline recounting of why she did what she did throughout the war. But it leads up, but it's not just, oh, excuse me, it's not just the war, it leads up into the war. So after the prologue, part 1, chapter 1, we jump back to 1853 when she's like 12 years old, and she sees the first real injustice being done to slaves. And that is her mammy, Tessie, who I absolutely love Tessie. Her son is sold off to the slave auctions. And she watches her mammy go through this grief. And she's only allowed to grieve for like a day. And then the next day she acts like nothing happens. And she's very confused on like, why did... And Tessie's boy's name is Grady. And she's like, why did Tessie have to get, like, why did Grady have to leave? Why all that? And Grady's 9 years old. And her father tells her, well, he's old enough to start making some work of himself. And I'm like, he's 9. But that was the thought process back then, which was so horrible. We get her on the plantation, and she sees her first slave with whip marks on his back, and she doesn't understand why he had to have those on his back. She thought it was very cruel. Then as she slowly starts growing, she sees how horrible other people treat the slaves, and she doesn't quite understand why, because you do have a bit of found family in this with her and her servants. She does not call them her slaves. When people say, oh, they're your slaves, and she goes, no, my dad owns slaves, I do not. And she like makes it very poignant. She does not own a slave. She is very close with Tessie, who's her mammy, Esther, who's the cook, Eli, who is Esther's husband and the stable hand. She at first is very scared of Gilbert, who is her dad's, I guess you would say, butler, manservant. But towards the end of the book, she ends up becoming very close with Gilbert. And I love Gilbert's ending. It was very sweet. I loved all their endings. Oh, and there's Ruby in here, which at first Ruby is her mother's mammy. And then once her mother passes away, Ruby stays on and helps around with the house. And then there's Luella, which Luella's not that big of a character, but she is what you would call, like, what was she called? Like a scullery maid, the one that like does the dishes, scrubs the floors, kind of like that. So you get that found family with Caroline and the servants, and she doesn't understand why people see them so differently than the way she does. And then when her mom passes away, she heads up to Pennsylvania to be with her mother's sister, who married a man up there who's like does banker stuff or something, and they have 2 daughters. And her dad goes off to like London for a couple of years, and slowly she is introduced into the abolitionists movement. But I love when she calls out the northern hypocrisy, and she calls out like the hypocrisy of how they're still segregated up in the north, even though they're free. They're like, the northerns don't mix with them, they're still segregated. So I love that she calls out that hypocrisy. After 2 years, her dad comes up and takes her home. And this is just a little bit right before the war, but the tension is starting to build. They move the southern capital from Montgomery, Alabama, up to Richmond, Virginia, and they throw like this big party. This is where the first quote that I'm going to share comes in, because I absolutely love Lynn Austin's writing and the way she tackles this subject and how she has Caroline look at everything. I had endured the reception as if it was just another jury party, but as I listened to the 2 women talking, reality began to set in. Not only was I being forced to face a war I dreaded, but I also lived in the capital of a new nation. Overnight, Richmond had become a symbol of rebellion, and for the enemy, the ultimate prize of war. The familiar stars and stripes no longer flew from every flagpole. In fact, I no longer lived in the United States of America. The city around me might look familiar, but I now reside in a foreign land. What worried me most was the fact that nobody I knew seemed to grieve over this loss the way I did. The man I loved was even willing to die for the right to create a new nation, fly a new flag. What was wrong with me that made me so different? I love that. I love that she sees a bigger part of something. They're sitting there, they're celebrating and being all joyous and all this, but she's like, I am having trouble, because before this she was, I'm American, but now she, like it said, she's gripping the reality. She's no longer part of the United States of America. She's part of the Confederacy, and she's grieving the loss of being a part of the United States, and everything just does not feel right around her. Absolutely love that. So from there we get the war and the recollections, which I'm not going to tell you guys too much because I don't want this to be full on spoilers. I kind of did some spoilers, but not a lot. I will come up to the point of she is visiting a kind of like a distant cousin in prison because he is a Yankee. He gets captured, so unfortunately I do have to spoil that little part. But her fiance's husband tells her that he doesn't want her to continue going to this prison because it makes her look like a Yankee sympathizer, and that it's also not right because it could ruin her reputation and, you know, her not being married and all that. But she tells him, because he's like, you are no longer to come to the prison. And he tells her good day and walks away, and she stops him. She goes, Mr. St. John, wait. He turns slowly and slowly limped back as I climbed down from my carriage. I'm sorry, but I have to refuse your request. I will write to Charles myself and tell him all my reasons for visiting Robert, and Eli will stay right beside me from now on as a chaperone. But I believe that obeying Christ is more important than worrying about what other people think. Robert is not an enemy soldier, but a prisoner, a friend suffering inhumane conditions. Jesus said, whatever we do for the least of our brethren, we do for him. And her father-in-law doesn't say anything. He just walks off. But can we get a hallelujah and an amen? I absolutely love that she's like, nope, this is my conviction. I am standing up for my conviction. I am doing what God wants me to do. Absolutely love that. That is the faith I am talking about, that I love in Lynn Austin's books. The next quote I have is another faith. She's talking to Eli about some things that are going on. I'm not going to tell you because I'm not going to spoil this part. But he says, they're talking about what Rahab may have felt like, and like the story of Rahab and Joshua and Jericho. She goes, I think I know how Rahab felt when she helped Joshua's spies escape from Jericho. I said, I know that the Bible portrays her as a Heronian, but it never occurred to me before that she had to betray her own city, her own people, in order to help her enemies escape. Eli responds back, you know why she did it. Bible says it's because she believed in the power of God. She know he gonna have his way, and she determined to be his servant no matter the cost. Absolutely love that. I'm not gonna read any more, though it is beautiful the way the faith from this story plays out, but there are some spoilers in it, and like I said, I don't want to get it too spoilery for you guys, because I already got it a little too much spoilery. Because in Caroline's mind, she really starts connecting the war between the North and the South very much to Exodus, and I love the parallels she makes. I'm gonna read a quote of one of those parallels here in a minute, but she very much, and she tells other people this too, and they're all just like, they're very much like, how dare you say God is against us? And funny enough, I just finished the book of Jeremiah, and Israel was the same way. How dare you say God is against us, and all this, even though they disobeyed God. But even with all the suffering, neither Daddy nor anyone else in Richmond talked of losing the war or abandoning the fight for Southern independence. Like the Old Testament Pharaoh, their hearts grew harder, leaving me to wonder how many more plagues we would have to endure before the slaves finally won their freedom. I love that. I love that parallel. I would have never connected that parallel of Exodus with our very own Civil War, but Lynn Austin did, and she does it in such a beautiful way. Like, seriously, if you guys really want to see more of the parallel of that, read this book, because it's so beautiful and how she connects all the different things. But this next part, it is going to be a little bit spoilery. It is after the war, and it's Josiah, who is Tessie's husband. He goes and finds Charles and talks to him about some things. But this, I absolutely love what Josiah tells Charles, because Josiah was very angry at the very beginning of this book. He was very angry, very hatred toward white people. and very much hated Caroline. But then some things happen that Caroline does for him and Tessie, and he ends up softening up his heart and opening it to God. But this is what Josiah tells Charles. God used that war to show you white boys what it's like to be a slave, Josiah continued. For 4 years, you sleeping on the ground instead of in your fine houses. You eating food that no one would feed a dog. You wearing rags and going barefoot and marching all day beneath a hot sun until you're so weary you want to die. You ain't allowed to see your family or the woman you love. Your life ain't even your own anymore. With someone telling you what to do and when to get up and when you can go to bed. How you like it, Master Charles? How you like trading places with me? Mic drop. So, yeah. Absolutely loved the faith. Just the amount of faith. I love like how Lynn Austin kind of showed us different ways God could have used that war to show people back to his word, and like Josiah said, showed them what it was like to be a slave. And if you even think about it, even the women that, even though they were in their own homes, they had to wear old clothing because they couldn't go out and buy cloth. Cloth was too expensive. They were slowly starving because food was getting to be too expensive. And I would have never made that parallel of what Josiah tells Charles. Would have never made that parallel. And I'm so glad that I read this because it opened my eyes to things of like faith throughout the Civil War. And I absolutely love Eli. Eli's my favorite character. And his story, the way it ends, so beautiful. Actually, the way Caroline and all of her servants, the way they get their ending, I absolutely love. The only thing I don't like about this is that we don't get an ending for one character who I really wanted to know. And we don't really get, actually, besides that one character, there's two other characters we don't really get much of an ending for as well. Whether or not they reconcile with Caroline or not for what she did throughout the war and her stance on the war. Yeah, I really don't know if I missed something, but I'm pretty sure we did not get any endings or reconciliations on those, which, you know what, it's okay. They are like side characters. I wish, like I said, I did get some kind of ending, but I did love the ending no matter what. Highly encourage you guys to go and read it. It is definitely what I needed, especially after that Gone with the Wind. I'm sorry, I'm still mad with Gone with the Wind. That book still upsets me to this day, and this has pretty much healed that. This is what I needed. This was the romance I needed. This was the take on racism I needed, because Caroline calls out the hypocrisy, and she does, like, there's a point when it comes to in here when her actions do have a bit of a consequence. I'm not going to tell you what that consequence is, not going to tell you what actions she has that gets her these consequences, but she says she would never not do it. And though she does go back through to see if she would have done things differently, I don't think she would have. I don't think she would have. I think she would have still done what she did because she decided she was going to be God's servant, and that the cost of losing what she needed to lose was a whole lot better than the South winning and slavery still being whole. Because when every time she thinks about slavery winning, she in her mind, it's Tessie, it's Eli, it's Esther, it's Josiah, it's Grady, it's Gilbert, it's all of her servants in her mind, and she wants them to be free. She does not want them to continue to be slaves. She wants them to be able to do things. And I love what she does for Tessie, and then Tessie does for some of the other servants that comes back around, and they surprise Caroline with what happened. There's just some beautiful things, and you can see how her fruit and her obedience to God really, really propels her story. One thing I do love that I do kind of want to show, part 1 starts off and you get the Confederate flag, and then you get to part 2 and it is the American flag. By the way, part 1 is very long and part 2 is very short, but I ended up giving this 5 stars. Definitely recommend and highly encourage you to check this out. Trigger warnings, though, I do have to throw that out. So trigger warnings, you do get miscarriage, you do get, YouTube will denounce me for that. A self-unaliving, the N-word is used, N-E-R-G-O is the one used most, and 1 drop of N-I-G-G-E-R. Yeah, only 1 time is that one used, but the other one is N-E-R-G-O. And then, of course, mistreatment of slaves back then. Unfortunately, that was a thing that happened. And we don't get depicted, thankfully, mistreatments, because I don't know if my heart could handle that. But we do get talks of it. Mom, before she passes away, is on laudanum, I think is what it's called. It's basically the opioid. So there is an opioid addiction bit. There is some mental health as well. Her mom suffers, I think, from depression. I'm not clinically sound to say if it's depression or if it's like bipolar, but if any of you suffer from those, I'm going to explain what her mom suffers, and maybe you guys can tell me. Her mom will have very low days where she needs the opioid to go to sleep and just cope. And then there's days where Caroline says it's very high, which to me it sounds like it's manic almost. But I'm not sure because, like I said, I'm not clinically sound. So her mom either suffers from bipolar or depression. She has low days and then she has her high days. But like I said, I can't tell you what that is. So there is that. And I think that's pretty much it on the trigger warnings. Other than that, it's very clean. There's a couple stolen kisses between her and Charles, but other than that, you don't get anything else. All in the next video. Bye.